My dearly loved Elizabeth, for I hope that it is what you will be called if you are born a girl. My daughter, who is your grandmama, has asked me to devote this day to writing a letter to you about my very long and fortunate life. I am not much given to letter writing nowadays, nor was I ever inclined to write about myself, yet you may perhaps find much to interest you herein. To look at me today, a tiny dot of a woman, you would not know that I once was married to a brilliant man whose name is writ large in history. Nor would you guess that Mr. Benjamin Franklin taught me to play backgammon, or that General Washington and his wife Martha were good friends to me. Together with Mrs. Dolly Madison, the wife of our 4th president, I raised funds for the Washington Monument, which will one day rise in this city. Indeed, I have met and conversed with all 14 presidents, among them the odious Mr. John Adams, the despicable Mr. Andrew Jackson, and even the young Mr. Franklin Pierce, who holds the office today. The legacies of some presidents, my dear, are greater than those of others. My story began on a hot August day in 1757. My parents, of old Dutch stock, were Philip Schuyler and Catherine van Rensselaer-Schuyler, and were most prominent in the province of New York. I was given the name Elizabeth, though my family called me sometimes Betsy and sometimes Eliza and sometimes Bess, but never Lizzie. Before my birth came that of my sister Angelica, and not long after I was born, my mother was delivered of another girl, our dear sister Margarita, called Peggy. My beloved mamma gave birth to 15 children over the course of her long years, yet fully 7 of my brothers and sisters did not survive infancy. It pained my heart as a child to think of them. It pains me now. When I was 8 years old, we moved to a grand and formal house, Albany's finest, which my father built at great expense, although to me it was simply home. It sat high on a hill over the Hudson River, and could be seen by friend and foe for miles around. Acres of gardens and farms surrounded it, and beyond that, woods and valleys. Our estate was called the Pastures, and I loved the place dearly. When we were not at our lessons, or at prayer, or sewing, or knitting, or practicing our instruments, we were free to roam the forests and valleys, the rocks, the waterfalls all around us. That was what I liked to do best. How I laughed when girls from the city came to visit and dared not to climb or run for fear of falling. From Mama, we learned to be good housekeepers, yet even then I was aware that the most difficult tasks in the household were taken up by Sylvia and her sons, Tom and Hanover. Those were the names I remember. And Prince, of course, who was my father's longest-serving help and support. As I grew older, I came to realize it is a great sin, then and now, to hold souls as property, with no freedom, no pay, and no surnames of their own. When my father died, my brothers, sisters, and I freed them all. And in my later life, I supported my husband as he helped found a school for the children of those who were formerly enslaved. It seems the day is coming when our country will not permit any human person to be enslaved. I pray nightly I will see that happen in my lifetime. I have spent too much of this letter on my own history, when the history of the nation was being lived at that moment too. When I was born, these United States did not exist. I could count the colonies without reaching 20. Our government, now situated here in the very city where I write, was far away in England, and we were ruled by a king. You, beloved child, will be born in a vast nation whose territories stretch from ocean to ocean. You will grow up with railways that crisscross the continent, and steamships that will travel to lands whose names are unknown to me. You will come of age in a strong and stable country esteemed throughout the world. That is, in part because of my adored husband, your great-grandfather Alexander Hamilton. Of Alexander Hamilton, much is known and much more will be written. I have myself spent the better part of 50 years tending his legacy. It is not too much to boast that my Alexander's words swayed the nation to accept our Constitution. He advised General Washington in war and in peace, and was appointed the first Secretary of the Treasury, a tribute to the foresight of his ideas. Without him, this country we live in would be a very different place. Alexander endured much as a child, abandoned by family and cast out of his island home at 14 years of age. I, who had every comfort when young, longed to bestow on him the warmth of hearth and home he never knew as a boy. Our courtship took place at the home of my aunt, who lives at the time near General Washington's headquarters in the province of New Jersey, and we were married shortly thereafter. Despite the uncertainty of war, those were happy days indeed. In society, I introduced Alexander to the ladies and gentlemen whose families had first settled America, and smoothed his course as he rose in stature and renown. In matter of politics, I was a sounding board, and his sometime scribe. When Alexander's hand ached from writing letters teeming with ideas for a new government, I took over his pen so he could rest. I was his proud wife for nearly 24 years, and tended to his needs as he dedicated himself to his country. Together we raised our 8 devoted children, and took in others who had none to care for them. Together, too, we weathered the scandal that beset us, and together we mourned our firstborn, Philip, who was killed as a young man, and our cherished daughter, Angelica, who suffered greatly after her brother's death and never recovered. There is not a day that goes by when I do not think of them. We found solace in the green and verdant countryside of Harlem, just 9 short miles outside New York City. Alexander purchased 32 acres of land there, and we built a home of our own, which Alexander called the Grange. He drew up careful plans for the garden and saw to it that 13 young sweet gum trees were planted on the grounds in honor of the first 13 colonies of our young nation. I wonder if those trees yet grow and provide shade. Then, in that most dreadful year of 1804, too soon, I found myself holding Alexander in my arms as he breathed his last after the duel that took his life. He was just 47 years old. From that time on, I have worn in a velvet pouch about my neck a poem composed in my honor by my husband, nor will it be removed till my dying day. I did not remarry. Instead, I turned my attention to my family and Alexander's legacy, and to the pressing needs all around me. Whenever I had a little property I could part with, or extra money to give away, I instructed that the funds be put aside for needy children. By the grace of God, I was able to donate land and property to build a school not far from the Grange. We call it the Hamilton Free School in my husband's honor. I did not have to live in splendor when so many around me were wanting. There was no institution at that time that would take in orphans and give them refuge from the dangerous streets of New York City. Working with devoted ladies from my church, through much persistence and perhaps some stubbornness, I raised the necessary funds to establish the Orphan Asylum Society of the city of New York. Many people scoffed at the idea of women attempting such an undertaking, but we were not daunted. The orphanage opened its doors in the year 1806. It was the first of its kind in the state of New York. We insisted that the director of the institution be fair, tender, and unremitting in the care of the orphans. I would not stand for unkindness. By 1837, our orphanage had grown too large for its cramped quarters in Greenwich Village. We erected a modern structure 3 miles north in Bloomingdale Village, which housed more than 200 children. I am told that those in need still knock on the doors of our orphanage. With God's help, May it outlive us all. In my long life, I have witnessed much more than I can tell in this writing, although, to be sure, it seems as if the years flew by. I shall add only that I hope to live my remaining days watching my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren grow, taking walks and tending my garden, and working ever to keep the flame of history, and especially of my beloved Alexander, alive. The daylight has dimmed, and truth be told, writing fatigues me. I end this letter, dear child, in all love and tenderness. May God bless you and keep you. My prayer for you is that you live as full as life as I have been granted to live, and that you dedicate yourself to this great country, so that it may truly provide the promise of life and liberty for all. I am, my dear child, yours ever affectionately.